Hey guys, it's Libby, and this is my April wrap-up, and what a month it was. I read 13 novels and 3 novellas, mainly because I got very sick. So what happened was, a couple of months ago I had an ear infection, and I took antibiotics for it, and then I thought it hadn't gotten better, but it turns out I didn't have the ear infection anymore. I just had like residual pressure in my ear, I didn't need antibiotics or anything. At the beginning of April, I had another ear infection, I waited for it to go away, and it felt like it was getting better, but then it felt like it was getting worse. But then I was like, wait, no, it's okay. It's just the infection is over, and now I just have some blockage. It turns out I did not just have some blockage. What I thought was blockage was my ear canal swelling closed, so I couldn't hear anything. And I sort of kept waiting for it to get better. I was like, okay, one more day. Like, surely it's not going to get worse for another day. But it kept doing that. So after about 5 or 6 days, I finally went to the doctor, and she's like, wow, that is an ear infection you got right there, missy. So they put me on the really strong antibiotic, levofloxacin, which, like, I guess it was better than having an ear infection, but not by much, because the side effects were, the ones that I had at least, were dizziness and brain fog, sensitivity to sunlight, and high risk of tendinitis. So basically what that means is I couldn't go outside, I couldn't drive anywhere because I was too dizzy to drive, or do anything particularly intellectual, and I also couldn't sew, edit videos, or play video games. And that is like basically all of the things that I do, and I was like, how am I gonna kill these 10 days while I'm on this drug? And so I decided I was going to have my own personal romance novel readathon. I had been in the middle of a murder mystery when I started taking it, and I was like, I am not smart enough to follow this murder mystery, but I am smart enough to read about kissing. So 10 of the books and all 3 of the novellas that I read were romance novels. The real question is going to be, how many of the main characters' names can I remember? The first one that I read is Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare, and this is going to become a running theme on this video because Tessa Dare, like, your publishers are not working hard enough for you, and they're giving you really crap covers. Like, this one's actually pretty good, but there's a lot of bad 80s prom dresses and interchangeable dudes in the future. The main problem with this one is the title. Like, that's not what happens in this book. But the reason I picked this one up, I hadn't read anything by Tessa Dare before. I did read romance novels, like, back in high school, but I haven't read anything for a while, except for Transcendence by Shea Savage, which is good. So I picked this one up because they talked about it on Vaginal Fantasy, which is Felicia Day's genre romance book club, and most of the books they read on that are, like, pretty bad. But this one I was like, wait, that actually sounds like something that I might want to read if at some point I am incapacitated. So I started with this one. I didn't know it was part of a series, but fortunately it is the first book in a series, and it's definitely a companion series, so whatever. So this one is about Isolde Goodnight, who is a lady who is down on her luck because she's an orphan, and, like, women can't get jobs. But her, like, godfather has left her a castle, which he recently bought, in his will. And so she goes to this castle, which is now hers, and someone is already living in it. It's the Duke who owns it. This one, like, was pretty okay, but it was silly. It's definitely the silliest of the things Tessa Dare has written. There are cosplayers. And then my initial plan was not to just read all of Tessa Dare's books, but that is what ended up happening because I got Romancing the Duke on Kindle, and at the end they'd be like, this is Tessa's next book, read the first 2 chapters. And I read it, and I was like, that is one of the best premises for a romance novel that I've ever heard of. I totally want to read this. And then I read it, and it was not good. Like, after the first 2 chapters, it was boring, and we'll get to it. But so the premise is our heroine, Madeline, is very shy, and she's like 17, and so she's about to be like introduced to society and have to go to all these balls and stuff, and she really doesn't want to do this. So she lies to her family, and she says, oh no, I don't need to go to all these parties to find a husband because I'm already engaged. I just met this guy when I was visiting my aunt last month, and you know, we fell in love and now we're engaged, and so I don't have to go to parties. And her family's like, oh, that's great, like, can we meet him? He's like, no, he's fighting Napoleon, so like we're not gonna, it's gonna be a long engagement. So she spends the next like 5 years lying to her family, and she has to keep up this pretense by writing letters to him. So she writes all these letters which she randomly addresses to a name that she made up and sends them off. And then as the war is wrapping up, she's like, oh gosh, I'm not gonna be able to keep this fib going any longer, so she kills him off. And this is great for her because now she can basically live as a widow. And she also gets like given a castle by her uncle. The thing that's tying all these stories together is the Earl of Linford, I think his name is, has died shortly before all 3 of these books take place, and has given castles to his like nieces and whatever, because he just had lots of money to sort of buy castles. Oh, I forgot to say what the title was. This is When a Scot Ties the Knot, which is not good. The cover is actually not too bad. So yeah, he leaves her a castle in Scotland so that she can be like near the homeland of her beloved. And she's, you know, having her own quiet life, and it's great. And then one day this dude shows up and says, like with her letters, and is like, I believe these belong to you, my darling. And that's where the preview ended. And I was like, I have to buy this right now. But unfortunately, the rest of the book ended up being a combination of like boring and rapey, because like he never actually forces her to have sex with him, but the entire foundation of their relationship is the fact that he's blackmailing her, which is kind of so I only gave this one 2 stars. The next one that I read, and the last one in this series about castles, is Say Yes to the Marquess, which is, okay, our main characters are named Cleo with an I, C-L-I-O, I don't think that's a thing, and Rafe, spelled R-A-F-E, not R-A-L-P-H, which is how you spell that. And I think Tessa Dare was like afraid that her American readers would read that as Ralph, and she's like, Ralph is not a sexy name. That is a tough thing about writing historical romance. Like, there's a pretty short list of sexy dude names, and you run out of them pretty fast. So in this one, Cleo is engaged to the Marquess, who is Rafe's older brother, and they've been engaged for like 8 years, but he's been on the continent doing his job. He works in like diplomacy for the crown or whatever, and she's realized that she doesn't actually want to marry him. She wants to marry his brother. So it's like that. It's pretty boring though. And also this book is the point where I started to realize like Tessa Dare's formula. Like, it's standard in a romance novel for your, at least one, usually both of your main characters to have troubled backgrounds. And the men in this series all have like parental issues, and the ladies all had some like traumatic experience that, you know, made them afraid to go out in crowds or whatever. And then they have to like heal each other with their love, as one does. And by this point I was like, okay, I see what's happening. Can we hurry it along? So this book got 2 stars for me. It's not that good in and of itself, but it is good in that it introduces Piers, who is the Marquess that Cleo is supposed to be marrying, because he shows up as the main character in the next book, which is Do You Want to Start a Scandal? Which is actually a title that I quite like, although the cover, oh man, that is a pretty bad 80s prom dress that she is wearing. I just have a hard time believing that romance novels really sell better when people are wearing this sort of weird monotone froth, as opposed to something at least like trying to be historically accurate. I don't know. It's the costuming nerd in me. Do You Want to Start a Scandal is a crossover between her 2 series. You got Piers from the Castle series and Charlotte Highwood from, what's the other one called? The Spindle Cove series. And I hadn't read any of the Spindle Cove books yet, so I was like a little, there was some stuff about her background where I was like, oh, I could not have seen that one coming, but if you've read the series, then you would have been able to see that one coming. So we learned about Charlotte because her 2 older sisters are main characters in 2 of the Spindle Cove books. So we already know her family quite well. Her father has been dead for a long time, and her mother is basically Mrs. Bennet. In fact, all of the Highwoods are basically the Bennets. Mrs. Bennet, or Mrs. Highwood, whatever, is like, I need to get my girls married to a rich man. She's Southern for some reason. And then Diana is basically Jane. Minerva is like a combination of Elizabeth and Mary. Wrap your head around that. And Charlotte is not quite Lydia. She's more intelligent than Lydia, but there's some Lydia about her. So this book starts when she and Piers are both guests of the same people, and she barges into this room where he's working to say like, hey, just want to let you know I don't want to marry you, and like my mom's gonna try to get us to, but like I'm not trying to do that. So sorry for the inconvenience. And then while they're having this conversation, some other people are like in the hallway and come into the room, and so they have to hide because you can't have a man and a woman in a room together. Such a scandal. So they go hide in the curtains, and the two people who enter the room start making some pretty loud noises of an amorous sort, and then they leave, and this is super mortifying. But not quite as mortifying as when the 8-year-old boy who lives in the house like starts screaming that like someone's being murdered because he heard all these noises coming from this room where these two people were, and everyone shows up, and as it happens, they have to pretend to be engaged. And this is a pretty common trope in romance novels, like fake engagement. Oh no, we're not kissing because we like each other, we're just kissing for show so that other people will believe the engagement. Yes, definitely, that is why. So Charlotte spends most of the book trying to figure out who these actual people were so she can expose them and be like, no, it was not me having sex in the study. It was these people. I don't have to be engaged anymore. And Piers, on the other hand, is like, you know, maybe we don't have to find them. Maybe we could just like actually get married because I kind of like you. So yeah, this one was pretty good. I gave it a 3.5. And then I moved to the Spindle Cove series. Now there is like a definite order that these ones go in. I didn't know that. I did not read these in order. I read like the last, there's what, 7? So there's 7, 3 of which are novellas. And I read like the last 4 first. And then I went back and read the first 3. So the first one I read was Beauty and the Blacksmith, which, like, I have so many problems with this cover. Okay, first off, 80s prom dress. Second off, that hand is saying stop. That hand is saying, please don't lift my skirt up anymore. Third, the title is referencing Beauty and the Beast, but the cover image is visually referencing both Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. Like, you gotta demand more from your publishers, Tessa. You're better than this. Anyway, I read this one because it's about Charlotte's oldest sister, Diana. And like, it was boring. Both of our main characters are pretty much nothing burgers. Diana, I said, she's like Jane Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, and just imagine if the main characters of Pride and Prejudice were not Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, if they were Jane and Mr. Bennet, would have been a way more boring book. And that's basically what we have here. I was like kind of waiting for there to be a twist or something, but it's basically just, you want to marry a blacksmith, but you're a lady. So yeah, 2 stars. The next one was Any Duchess Will Do, which is kind of the opposite of that. In this one, you've got a rich guy and a poor girl. Oh, wait, can I remember their names? Pauline and Griffin. Not a good name. So, Griffin is the Duke of whatever he's the Duke of, and his mom is like, I want some grandchildren. You're gonna go get married right now. And he really doesn't want to do this. So she like barges into this cafe in Spindle Cove where our heroine, Pauline, is the like barmaid. And she's like, okay, pick a girl and I will teach her to be a duchess and then you have to marry her. And he's like, okay, I'll pick the barmaid. Good luck, Mom. So then begins this thing where the Dowager Duchess is like trying to like make her beautiful and respectable. And the Duke is like, I will give you £1,000 if you mess up so badly and embarrass my mother so that I don't have to get married, because no offense, but I don't want to get married. Do they end up getting married? The main problem that I had with this one is that it just is too short. It's too compacted. They basically go from not knowing each other at all to like 4 days later, I love you so much and I cannot be without you. And that is just too short a time for plausibility. I give this one 2.5 stars. The next one is a novella, and it's called Lord Dashwood Missed Out. And this one also had a pretty good premise, although only about 2/3 of the book was the story of our main characters, whose names are Lord Dashwood, Dash, and Nora, short for Eleanor. I've been doing pretty good. But this one, I don't exactly remember the premise, but like Nora has been in love with Dash for, like, they were next door neighbors and she was in love with him for her teenage years. And he like never noticed her, and then he went off to college, and then she like wrote this essay in a rage of fury one night. It's like, you know what? Fuck men. You think you need them, but you don't. And then she decided to send this to a newspaper, and it got published, and like now she's super famous. Unfortunately, he is also super famous, like, for being a jerk. And at the beginning of this book, they end up stuck in a carriage together. Wouldn't you know? This one was pretty fun, but it did have like, so Tessa Dare, her stories are set in a historical time period, but the people are like fairly modern people. And this had like I had the greatest difficulty suspending my disbelief that this sort of thing would actually happen in 1815. So I gave it a 3 stars. Then I finally went back to the beginning and read the first book in the series and proceeded through in the intended order. So the next book is A Night to Surrender. And this cover, I gotta say, is probably the best of them. Like, that dress is like that is a dress that I could see existing from that time period. Unfortunately, the title is not so great. It's very generic, and like, I don't think that has anything to do with the plot. So our main characters in this book are named Susanna and Bramwell, and basically it's like a battle of the sexes in like this small town. And so the book sometimes will be like, it goes on about real men, and real men drink beer and are condescending to women. And I was like, shut up, book. So this one was also only 3 stars. Then we move on to a novella called Once Upon a Winter's Eve. This is about Violet, and the guy, his identity is a spoiler. This is a novella, and it's very, like, it almost happens in real time, I think. There aren't, like, breaks. So it's very action-packed, and I quite liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I don't want to say too much more about it, though, because, like, surprise. Then we had A Week to Be Wicked, which I quite liked the first 6 chapters of. This is about one of the Highwood sisters. It's about Minerva, and Minerva is worried that Colin Sandhurst, Lord Payne, is going to elope with her sister because he doesn't need her sister's money, but he is not allowed to get his inheritance until he's 27 or until he gets married. So he like does need to marry for money, as it were. And Minerva thinks he's a total douche face and does not want her poor sister to be stuck with him. So she goes to him and she says, "Oi, instead of marrying my sister, take me to Edinburgh to a geology symposium, because I have literally just discovered dinosaurs, and when I present my findings, they will award me the prize of 500 guineas, and you can take this money instead of having to marry to get your inheritance." And he's like, "I think this is a really bad idea." And she's like, "I think this is a great idea. Let's go." And the premise was good, and I liked the characters, and then like they start their trip to Edinburgh, and it was like some powerful stupid. They have like the craziest, cheesiest hijinks there, and I really think this book would have been better if it was the first 6 chapters, then the word shenanigans, and then like the last 3 chapters, because everything in the middle I was just like, I wasn't mad at the book, I was embarrassed for the book. I was like, this is not good. So I give that one 2 stars, despite my hopes from the beginning. And then last Tessa Dare, but not the last romance novel, because I moved on. This one is called A Lady by Midnight, and our main characters are Kate and dude's first name is a spoiler, but we will call him Corporal Thorn. And you sort of see these two in the earlier books in the series. And I found out that like this book was about them, and I was like, wait, they fall in love? I so ship that. So I was going into this one with high expectations, and unlike the other books that I went into with high expectations, this one actually delivered. I thought it was very good. It's another sort of pretend engagement story. And to be fair, the ending did get a bit like melodramatic, but at that point I was so into it, I was just like, whatever you want to do, I'm down with. So I gave this one 4 stars. And then that completed the Spindle Cove series for me. So I went back to Vaginal Fantasy to see what other romance novels they liked. And I decided to not do Regency, because I just read a bunch of Regency, and I instead did a fantasy romance novel. And I read Radiance by Grace Draven. Now, before I talk about this book, I just want to say, Grace Draven plays Dota 2. Dota 2 is an esport. It's very similar to League of Legends and sort of in the same category as Counter-Strike Global Offensive and Overwatch. And Grace Draven has not actually confirmed that she is a Dota 2 player, but her book, the series, is called The Wraith Kings. Wraith King is a hero that you can play in Dota 2. This first book is called Radiance. Radiance is an item that you can buy in Dota 2 to burn all the enemies around you. And the second book is a cat knocking a pen off of a table. That's not true. The second book is called Eidolon, which literally means image in Greek, and an eidolon is this. It is created by the hero Enigma. He makes an image of himself, and they run around and attack you. They have a kind of silly animation. Anyway, what does that have to do with anything? Not much. But this book, I heard about it on Vaginal Fantasy, and I think some other booktubers have also read it. And it got like pretty high praise for having a romance that like starts out as a friendship. I thought this book was awful. I thought it was incompetently written. At the end, I found out that it was self-published, and I was like, this makes sense, because I do not think a publisher would accept this. So, first problem, there is no plot. Things happen, but they do not build on each other until, like, maybe in the epilogue. Like, I'll believe that the second book in this series has a plot, but I won't know because I'm not going to read the second book. The other problem is that both of the main characters are total Mary Sues. So, in this book, it's in a fantasy world where there's human races, and the human race that we're following is the Gauri, and then there's like non-human races, and the, oh crap, what is Brishan? He's like a, I don't remember what they're called, but he's like a gray dude with pointy teeth and weird eyes. And these two members of the royal families of different races have to marry each other to cement a political alliance. And like, this is the first time this has happened in centuries, blah, blah, blah. And like, both of the races thinks the other race is like super gross looking. Oh, hi, I have a cat. Wasn't expecting that. Okay, let's see how long she'll be nice to me before she decides to jump off. Here, Nova, you wanna say hi to the internet? Oh. Here's Nova. I think she gets jealous when I talk to the camera. So where was I before I was so rudely interrupted? Yeah, so they have to marry each other even though they find each other like super gross to look at. And so you'd think there could be like some tension here, but there is not. Both of them are just like perfect people who are like, you know, I can see past your ugliness into your kind soul, and they both have kind souls, and they're both like good at all of the things they need to be good at. And I was like, can you guys like hate each other at least a little bit at some point? Can one of you do something stupid and the other one gets mad? It doesn't happen in the whole book. They just have the perfect marriage, even though they're like the worst matched people in the history of fiction. Okay, maybe not quite. And then finally, the thing that this book has been praised for, which is that they have a friendship before they have a romantic attachment. I just don't think that's true. I think they have a non-sexual romantic attachment, and then that turns into a sexual romantic attachment. Because there's like a lot of face touching and hair stroking. Like, I have friends. I know what it's like to have friends. I don't touch their faces that much. Like, that's a romantic thing that you guys are doing. And I know that you don't want to have sex with each other. You just have a platonic, romantic relationship. And then finally, the writing, it just wasn't very well thought out. This takes place in alternating single person perspective. So it's all in third person, but first chapter is in, what's the lady's name? Ildiko. First chapter, the odd chapters are in her perspective, third person, and the even chapters are in Brishen's third person perspective. Did I do enough things with my hands? And unfortunately, the author sometimes wants to get a scene from both of their perspectives. So she'll just like start a new chapter with wherever the last one left off, and then go back to the last one. And so the timeline is kind of lumpy and it's not very good. And there was one point, one chapter transition, where I was like, I thought that this was taking place about 5 minutes after the previous chapter had ended. But it was actually taking place about 2 months after the previous chapter had ended. And I was like, I just spent the first 3 paragraphs, and they're long paragraphs, being super lost. So initially I gave this book 2 stars, but now I'm thinking this is really just a 1-star book. Like, I did consider giving it 1 star, but I was like, no, I need to reserve 1 stars for books that like make me mad. And this book didn't make me mad. It made me disappointed and sad for it. But you know, it just, the whole thing is incompetent. I think it's a 1-star book. Okay, sorry Nova, I have to move to see what the next book I read was. Are you going to abandon me? Yes, she doesn't really love me. So then I was like, screw fantasy, back to Regency. And I decided to look at the works of Sarah MacLean. Now Sarah MacLean is like the favorite romance novel author of the people at Book Riot, which is a sort of book news and opinion website that I follow. And I looked at the summaries of the books that she had written, and like, the one that looked really good to me was The Day of the Duchess, which unfortunately doesn't come out until June. It's about a married couple who have like separated because they hate each other so much, and then they fall back in love, and that sounds great. But since I couldn't read that one, I decided to just read the one before it in the series, and I don't think these series are like, they're definitely companion novels. So I read A Scot in the Dark. Now, Tessa Dare, whoever is doing Sarah MacLean's titles and covers, you need to get that person, because that doesn't look super period, but it does look nice, and A Scot in the Dark is a great pun. Now this book isn't actually Regency, it's set in what's typically called the Romantic period, at least in the costuming world. It's set in 1834, which is unfortunate because it means that women, this is basically the ugliest time in women's dress. This is what your average lady walking down the street was looking like. But anyway, this is about, I have to remember their names, Lillian and Alec, and Alec is a Scottish guy. He is a Scot in the dark, apparently. They don't spend that much time in the dark. And he is like 17th in line to become the Duke of whatever. And all 17 people die. So he ends up being an English Duke, even though he really hates England because parental issues. His English mother hated Scotland and abandoned him. This happens a lot in romance novels. So even though he's like entitled, he wants as little to do as possible with his new English estate. So he doesn't know that he actually has a ward named Lillian, and a ward is kind of like a foster child. Lest this sound creepy, Sarah MacLean tried really hard to make this not creepy. Lillian's ward conditions were unusual, and like normally you're released at 18 or 21, but she's stuck being a ward until she gets married. So she's 23 and she's still a ward, which is unusual, but makes it not gross. And she has taken up with this like douchebag artist boyfriend who paints a nude portrait of her, which he says he isn't going to tell anybody, and then he like exhibits it at the National Gallery. So she's got this whole scandal going on, and he has to like, he discovers that he has a ward that he has to take care of, and he has to come down and save her. Do they make out? Yes, they make out. This book was a bit of a disappointment. Neither of the main characters was particularly well fleshed out, and so the characteristics they did have, we just sort of got to hear on repeat over and over again. And I think this would have been more suited to a novella than to a novel. Like, if it was half the length, I think it would have been twice as good. So yeah, this one gets 2 stars. And then, oh, the end is in sight, last romance novel. So to find this one, I decided I didn't really like Sarah MacLean's books, but I was on her website, and she has like a list of like her favorite romance novels, and I was like, maybe I can find something good here. So I went through and I picked another one about a Scot. I don't have a Scottish thing, I promise. Called The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie. And this is not Regency, this is set in 1881, and our hero is an autistic man. And in this one, the love story was not as much the focus as in the previous books that I've read, because there's the B plot has a much bigger role, and it's that he, like 5 years ago, basically walked in on a murder scene and found this corpse. Since he's autistic, his older brother thought that he was the murderer, and he knew that he can't lie, so he didn't want him to be questioned by the police, so he like sent him back to Scotland very hush-hush. And this was incredibly suspicious, and now in the first couple of chapters of the books, another girl who was associated with the first murder victim is also dead. So there's also this like cat and mouse, like Inspector Javert, Jean Valjean thing going on, in addition to the fact that he's having an affair. And this book was unfortunately way too exciting and not what I needed at all during my convalescing period. I remember one night I stayed up till like 11, which is late for me, like being like, what's gonna happen next? What's gonna happen next? And I knew I wasn't gonna be able to finish it like that night, but I was like, I don't care, I just gotta keep going. And then I went to bed at 11 and I tried to sleep, but I couldn't because I just kept thinking about what's gonna happen next. So I got up at 4 and I kept reading it, and this was I felt I was paying for it the next day. I felt awful. So I thought this one was quite well done, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Oh, the lady's name is Beth. Not Elizabeth, just Beth. Oh, and in case you're wondering, I say autistic man instead of man with autism. I know that there's a controversy about this in the autism and autism ally community. That I use identity first phrasing because that's what most actual autistic people do, because if you use person first phrasing, that is the phrasing that you use for a disease, and autism is not a disease. If you want to know more about this, I will leave a link in the description. So after that 9 days of a million romance books, I went back to my murder mysteries, and I've read the first 2 books in the Flavia de Luce series. The first one is The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie, and the second one is The Weed That Strings the Hangman's Bag. These are by Alan Bradley. These are the Flavia de Luce series. Did I say that? I don't remember if I said that. Flavia de Luce, name of the series, name of the main character. So Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie, this is the first book that I read this month, and then these names are hard to say. Weed That Strings the Hangman's Bag, I was in the middle of when I got put on levofloxacin, and I was just like, I can't pay enough attention to this. So this murder mystery series is set in 1950 in England, and our detective Flavia is 11 years old, and she's really into chemistry, and she uses her mad chemical skills to solve the various crimes. This is another situation where like it's a small English town with a disturbing number of murders, so you have to be willing to suspend your disbelief a little bit, but I got through Miss Fisher's murder mysteries, so this is nothing. These are narrated in the first person, and since Flavia is an 11-year-old girl, it's kind of like, I'm not quite sure what the word is, it's kind of like persnickety in tone, and it's not too bad, but I think in most contexts I would have been bothered by this, but since it's a mystery, like you kind of want there to be too many details so that there's red herrings and like you can figure out what's going on. In the first book, I had everything, I didn't know exactly how it played out, but I kind of sorted everything out, except for the identity of the murderer. I figured out, the motive and the method, before it happened. Weed That Strings the Hangman's Bag, I had no idea what was happening. I got super taken by surprise, and, not in a good way. Like, I feel like This one was interesting and sort of had stakes. There was even an action scene, which is unusual since your main character is an 11-year-old girl. But this one, it felt rather bland. It was just like, there's a murder, and there's numerous suspects, and Flavia finds out about them, and then at the end she figures out who the murderer is. And I had another little niggling problem with this one. So Flavia has two older sisters, Ophelia and Daphne, and neither of them were particularly nice to her, but there's a real antagonistic relationship between Flavia and Ophelia. In the beginning of the first book, her sisters have like tied her up in a closet, and so Flavia exacts chemical retribution. And in this one, Flavia is also using her chemical knowledge to pull a prank on Ophelia, but Ophelia hasn't really done anything, and I'm like, it made it harder to like Flavia. She just seems sort of mean. So I gave this one 4 stars, and I gave this one 3 stars. I am planning to continue with the series, but if like the third one is of this caliber, I might stop. And then the last book that I read was This House is Haunted by John Boyne. Goodreads, when I first joined, said, Libby, you will love this book. You need to read this book. This is a gothic, horror-y, mystery thing in the Victorian period. Go read it. And I was like, okay. And then I read some reviews of it, and one of the reviews said, like, don't read this like it is a straight novel. Read this like it is a parody. So that is the spirit that I went into this book with. And I gotta say, even with that in mind, I still had a hard time enjoying it. Like, it wasn't bad, it just was a turn of the screw. Like, I've already read a turn of the screw. I know how it works. And interestingly enough, the points where it deviated away from the plot of A Turn of the Screw were plot points where it deviated towards Jane Eyre. So it's like 10% original content, 75% Turn of the Screw, 15% Jane Eyre. It's your pretty standard, like, Victorian Gothic story. We have a young lady who is orphaned. Her father dies early in the book, and then she gets a position as a governess in a mysterious house in the country, which is run down for 2 sort of slightly odd but fairly angelic seeming children, and there are no adults in the house. Yea, verily, there is much weirdness. This emphasizes the horror elements a bit more, but I have to say, I was never really scared. Also, John Boyne, the author, is a man. He has never been a 21-year-old female, as far as I know, and he, like, didn't really get it right. I was like, that's not how 21-year-old women behave. So I gave this 3 stars. I kind of don't think I'm going to be keeping it. Basically, the role of this book in the universe is if, in some dystopian future, all copies of A Turn of the Screw have been destroyed, we can take comfort in the fact that at least we still have this. So that's all the things I read in April. Unfortunately, none of them rated 5 stars. But I think the real moral of this video is, if you're worried about not having enough reading time, just wait until you get really, really sick, and then you literally cannot do anything else. So as for right now, I'm still working on the audiobook of Great Expectations. I started reading it for Katie from Books and Things. She's doing a not-so-hypothetical Victorian literature course, and she does one video about 2 books every 2 months, and one of the March books was Great Expectations, and we're already in May, so I'm going to be behind on the May books, but whatever. And I'm also working on The Teleportation Accident by Ned Bowman, which you'll be very familiar with if you watch my Cozy Reading Night vlog. And then the next book that I have my eye on, because I'm reading my books alphabetically by author this year, is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. But I know this book is popular on the booktubes, so I wanted to ask you guys, I only own this book. I don't own the next books in the series. So, like, do I need to get those right now? Will the end of this make me, like, immediately want to start the next book? Or is it more the sort of series where, like, you can read a book and then read a couple other books and then come back to this series? I don't know. I would appreciate your advice. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I will see you later.